From Abuja.
It's all about the human struggle to raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. I'm Magnus Packel, and this is Magnus Packel GVA. I appreciate you being a part of our show. In view today, microcredit and economic development in Africa. A focus on Nigeria. But before that, we will attempt to settle the confusion between wealth creation and poverty reduction in our quick view. Coming up. There are some people who believe that wealth creation and poverty reduction are flip sides of the same coin. It is even getting fashionable to refuse to talk of poverty reduction and instead to focus on wealth creation. Why do they do this? I think they believe that the word poverty is depressing, but the word wealth is uplifting. That may be true, but that should not cause us to miss the point. Let's note this. In any society, most adults are creating wealth, but some more quickly than others. After all, wealth creation can be defined as the creation of assets, both in terms of physical and human capital. And assets are things that can generate income. Crude petroleum and other mineral resources are assets. Savings are assets. Agricultural produce stored after harvest by farmers are also assets. Indeed, for many households, children with a clear promise for success in the future are also considered assets. So assets are things that can generate income. On the other hand, poverty generally relates to a low absolute or relative level of income. It is generally an unsatisfactory level of well-being, where there is poor access to good nutrition, clean water, sanitation, basic health care, and promising basic education. Therefore, to be successful in fighting poverty in Africa, we first have to call the war what it is. That is, policymakers must agree and state clearly that we are launching a war against poverty. That is what other people who have been successful against poverty have done. Poor people by themselves create wealth, but they don't create it fast and robustly enough to get out of poverty. We must help them to do that. Calling it wealth creation is needlessly diversionary. It makes the war against poverty too long. Calling it wealth creation takes the focus from the issue. Just call it poverty eradication. It's okay. Still in view, microfinance and development. But up next in our hidden economics, blood. Doctors and former soldiers in politics. What do former soldiers and medical doctors have in common that makes them to want to be politicians? Blood. That's it, blood. As we now all know, the field of politics is not for the faint-hearted. It is not for people who cannot stand the sight of blood. As a matter of fact, most politicians call it this game of politics. They know you can win or lose. But I'll tell you what, they never like to lose. Indeed, when they lose, like a cat, they tend to have 9 lives. They keep coming back. Now, don't do this, but if you throw a cat out the window from, say, the 2nd floor, thinking it dead, you'll see that cat come around again the next day. How does he do it? He always manages to land on his feet. That's what many good politicians do. Never write them off. They always find a way to come back. Indeed, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, former president of Brazil, was known as an eternal candidate because he had run for president 3 consecutive times before winning in 2002. Medical doctors and soldiers like politics. I think it's that blood thing. They appear as well prepared as anyone for the battle and the bloody nose you can suffer in politics. They don't seem to mind the sight of blood. Now here is the economics in all of this. When they come for your vote, tell that doctor and the old soldier that if you want to represent us, be sure that you are ready to take that bloody nose for us. Let them tell you that their training makes them best prepared to fight for you. The soldier fights a war not to purposefully kill and see blood, but to secure peace and development. The medical doctor cuts the patient not so as to watch a patient bleed, but to remove a malady so that the patient can recover and become more productive for society. So folks, as I said, when that medical doctor or that old soldier comes to you asking for your vote, ask him if by his training he's truly ready to stand the sight of blood to raise the level of living. Our hidden economics for you. In Africa, access to credit is quite limited. Indeed, a recent World Bank study shows that in sub-Saharan Africa, only about 24% of adults have bank accounts at formal financial institutions. And only about 5% of the people have received a loan from a bank in the past year. Recently, I had a discussion with His Excellency Honorable Chief Jethro M. Akun, M.O.N., the former Deputy Governor of Plateau State and now Chairman of Eagle Microfinance Bank, and also President of the National Association of Microfinance Banks in Nigeria. And he was joined by Mr. Kunle Oketekun, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Fortis Microfinance Bank. Mr. Oketekun holds a master's degree in banking and finance and has over 20 years' experience in the banking industry. Nigeria appears to be better off compared to the sub-Saharan African average, with 30% of adults having bank accounts. However, it lags the sub-Saharan African average in terms of adults that got loans in the past year, with just 2%. In our quick comparison, only South Africa and Kenya approach 10% in terms of adults with loans from formal financial institutions. Now let's join my guests in our discussion of the Nigerian microfinance experience. I don't believe that a strong trickling down is taking place. So we're not able to rev up our economies the way we would want. We're not able to create jobs. But I've always been thinking that we do have some facilities that perhaps are not as well deployed as they probably could be. And one very key and important facility that I think we have is microfinancing. I think that in Africa, we need a much stronger role for microfinancing, to make sure that we get that trickle down to be trickled down. And I keep saying that because I don't believe that the trickling down is happening by itself. We've got to, in our part of the world, with the kind of state that we're in terms of development, I think we need to trickle it down. So, as I said, really a great privilege that we're here to talk about microfinancing today. So, if I may just start off, what is I asked the president here of the association, what is the state of microfinancing in Nigeria today?
Well, thank you very much. If there's any time that we need microfinancing in this country, this is the time. This is the only vehicle that can trickle down effectively and provide access to funds to the rural active poor. At the moment, a policy was put in place by the central bank in 2005, and that has been reviewed. And the idea is for it to effectively see that microfinance sector in this country is brought to the fore and provide vehicles that can carry on these activities by providing loanable funds at an affordable rate for the rural communities. And that I think the microfinance banks that now are over 800 are doing.
Very good that you said that. And I want to just pick up on that. When your MD of one of the biggest banks in the industry, when the policy was put in place, late 2005, what I thought then what happened was, I thought there would be a revolution, that everybody out there would know that Nigeria has a great focus, well-designed set of policies for getting resources to the ordinary person. In your experience as MD CEO of one of the major microfinance banks in the country, what do you think has happened as far as microfinancing? People getting to know it well now, it's embracing it as well as we thought?
I think it's been a very interesting journey. I think in terms of success rate, it's been mixed. What has happened over the past 5 years, for instance, is that in my own understanding, we now have 3 broad categories of microfinance bank. You have the strong, you have the very strong, then you have the marginal or the weak ones. So you have a diverse, in terms of types, you could have as many types as there are numbers of microfinance. So you have some players in the industry who will do monthly turnover in terms of customer turnover over 10 million every 30 days. You have some whose capital is still 20 million. So that's what you've had over the time. So I think it's been a mixed story. Some have been very successful, some not so successful. In terms of acceptance, I think it has grown over the years.
Yeah.
I think the future of microfinance in Nigeria is extremely bright. The market is just big, it's just huge. You have over 100 million people who have never been banked before, ever.
Absolutely.
So when you have that kind of massive population, it's just amazing what's possible for microfinance. The potential is huge. And like the president has said, there's not a better time now for microfinance than now in Nigeria.
But I just wanted to follow up on this issue of our customers and the banks being accessible even in remote areas. But people complain sometimes, Mr. MD, that some microfinance banks look just like regular commercial banks, and that they are only in the urban areas. Your banks and your experience, are you really very close, as the president of the association has said, very close to the customer, even in remote areas?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I use Forza as an example.
Yeah.
When people talk about Forza, what they see is branches in Abuja, for instance. We have about 14 branches in the city of Abuja, marketplaces. But a lot of people don't know that we're actually stronger in the remote areas. In our case, we also have a partnership with a cooperative called SMC.
Okay.
A lot of people don't even know that we're currently in about 7 states.
Now, these cooperatives, are they what we used to call microfinance institutions? There came time when we said, okay, these are microfinance banks, but before we had the policy, when people were just MFIs.
At the moment, there is this deliberate approach by Federal Ministry for Agriculture through roofing to mobilize and conscientize rural donors from the village level to embrace saving and also manage small credit that is provided to them through microfinance banks or what we call financial cooperatives. And those financial cooperatives and financial NGOs are not regulated, but they also provide basic credit. And that's where also the difference comes in. While the microfinance banks can take deposit, they will not take deposit. And so when they grow from that village, it is expected as a chain value. From that village, they will come over to cooperatives or financial NGOs, depending on the location. And subsequently, the desire is that they grow and become microfinance banks. And by the time they get to that, they become regulated. And when microfinance banks have resources. They also use the same channel to get back to the remote areas. So it is expected that virtually all the microfinance banks should have that linkage,
Okay.
so that we can get to the grassroots.
This company I'm talking about, the one I'm talking about in particular,
Yes.
is for profit.
Okay.
So it's a bit different from the NGO type MFIs. The basic difference is that they're very well structured.
Yes.
And in terms of funding, they also have, they're well supported, and so they're able to do almost anything that a full-fledged microfinance institution or bank would do. So they're not exactly NGO type cooperatives. Yeah.
Access to credit, interest rate. That debate is always out there. Some people say, don't worry about the interest rate. It's not that it's too high. What is really important is access to credit. How do we speak to that?
Okay. Again, there's another myth that needs to be corrected there. There's this conception that microfinance banks are very expensive and they charge high rates. It's not necessarily true. The truth is that for you to attract deposits, there's this relationship between risk and return. From somebody who probably has this money or have money with a commercial bank, you must pay it to premium. So what you find out is that most microfinance banks will pay typically 2, 3, 4, 5% higher on deposit to the customers. So when you pay a little bit higher to attract the funding, it's only natural that when you also lend
2-3% higher than the market rate.
Yes,
okay.
Market rate, average
okay.
Deposit rate
Sure.
for the commercial banks. So it makes sense that when you're also trying to give out the loan, your pricing will also be slightly higher. Because your attractiveness is slightly higher. So again, what we've seen over the time is that the average price industry-wide now for microfinance has been on a downward trend. Why is that? Because again, there are two broad categories of microfinance customers. The new framework allows for us to do about 20%. We do MSMEs, micro, small, medium, enterprises. Now for the slightly bigger customers that we have, the ones we have, I said to you, we run two models in one.
Yes.
For those categories of customers, if your pricing is not competitive, close to what the commercial banks are, they simply won't come to you because they are not different from the same customers that go to the commercial banks. So we in our institution, for instance, I can say, our pricing is not that different. Maybe just marginally higher.
Is it easier to get a loan from a microfinance bank than from a commercial bank?
Much more easier.
Yeah.
And what we find out, for instance, in the Abuja environment, for instance, is that we find ourselves competing head to head in that.
Because it's almost impossible to get $1 from a commercial bank.
What we've actually seen,
an average person.
what we've seen over time is a serious migration of some of anybody doing between 0 and 5 million.
Yes.
Will typically get attention from a microfinance bank much easier than they could. And we've seen over time a serious migration in terms of patronage from people who otherwise were doing business with the commercial bank. So I think on pricing, it is exaggerated that microfinance charge higher. What is happening is, first on the deposit side, we find out also now that quite a lot of people who used to have funds with the commercial banks are moving them to the microfinance bank because it makes a lot of sense. On the lending side, we lend to small people, they pay back. The payment is much better than it is with the commercial bank.
Absolutely.
On the deposit side, we pay slightly higher. In fact, you'll be shocked the kind of people that deposit money with microfinance bank now. Mind-blowing. Institutions, individuals, some doing tens of millions, some hundreds of millions, and they're comfortable enough to do this level of deposit with the microfinance bank.
It done better. Before I go to call my people, make they send me money. Now who go send and come? I go carry collect them. But now with Fortis mobile money, one time don't enter my telephone.
Discover a new way to pay today. Do business the Fortis way. To register, visit any Fortis Mobile Money authorised agent near you or go to www.fortismobilemoney.com or call 098 744 440. Fortis Mobile Money. Just press send.
Access to credit is quite limited in Africa. Small and medium enterprises and most of the poor population in sub-Saharan Africa have very limited access to credit, as only about 5% of adults got a loan from a bank in the past year. As we have already said, in Nigeria, only about 2% of adults have got a bank loan. One reason for this is that the government and big oil companies are literally crowding out the market. The banks are apparently giving out loans, but not to the average small and medium enterprise. If access to capital is improved, the private sector can become more robust in the ability to engage these otherwise free radicals. The ultimate solution to poverty, unemployment, and economic stagnation is a healthy, growing, and competitive private sector, where the real GDP growth rate is closer to 10%. However, the private sector will not be able to grow without structural changes and systemic enhancements. But there is a problem. The interest rates out there are simply too high. If a microfinance bank is charging 30 to 40% in interest rates, this means that the young company must have a rate of return much higher than this to stay in business. There are not many businesses that provide such returns. There are people that say that market access is more critical than interest rate. In today's global marketplace, charge these people 100% interest rate and see if they can, like a piper, keep their tune for very long. If we want to build our private sector to become more robust, keep our cost of doing business down, and be globally competitive in trade, then interest rates must come down, especially among microfinance banks. Yes, microfinance banks must look to get savings from their customers and depositors in order to secure lower borrowing rates for on-lending. However, this will take some time. What has to happen now is this. Across the three tiers of government, we must create a microfinance fund amounting to at least 1% of the budget. We have to do this if we want to rebuild our private sector and create jobs. Now, some states have shown strong commitment to microcredit and to be commended. However, states should not lend directly to the people, as they are not banks, and there is a moral hazard in repayment to the government. The government should simply lend to the microfinance banks at no more than a 3% interest rate, and for a term of not less than 10 years. They would in turn on-lend at below 10% to targeted sectors determined by the government, and not to persons or organizations. This would be a good thing for the economy and should happen in every budget cycle. Indeed, special purpose loans may also be secured from donors by the government for on-lending through microfinance banks. Microfinance banks and institutions are pivotal for building our private sector and raising our level of living. I'm Magnus Packall, and that's my view.